let's get started. I think we have a good group together. I'm the host for today for this session. I'm Melanie. I'm part of the map design team here at Mapbox. So I'm just gonna lead through this session, but we have a lot of great folks from the map organization here today to get your questions answered. So this session is really meant to be an interactive experience between you, the developer community, and key members from our maps organization here at Mapbox. So you're welcome to ask us questions, and I see you've already been doing this. This is great, but you're also very welcome to share feedback about our products and services, things you really wanted to see in our products for a long time. We'd love to hear about this for sure. So that's to say this is not a presentation per se. It's really more of a chance for you to speak with the Maps product teams and get your questions answered. So you can use the chat in Zoom for general comments and just general conversation, like where you're tuning in from. And you can also submit questions to the via the Q&A button. So use the Q&A button if you have specific questions. And then my co-host Greg, he'll sort of like try to coordinate questions as they're kind of coming in. And you can, there's no limit. You can ask as many questions as you would like, and we'll try, to get to answer all of them. So this is pretty much it in terms of logistics. You probably want to know who's here today. So we have a really big group of Maps people here today. So we're not gonna go and introduce everybody individually, but have a look at this, have a read, and then ask people. As we're distributing questions, we'll kind of like give a quick introduction about each person that's sort of like taking the question, so that you know who's answering your question. So 12 people, I think, we have here, really broad spectrum across the board. So I hope we get to answer all of your questions that are coming in today. I think that's it. With that being said, I think we're ready to get started with questions. So I am just gonna start on the top, I think. I see there's a bunch of follow-up questions that are coming from probably previous sessions. So the first one, this is a follow-up question in the session of petabyte data processing and rendering part. Which features in Mapbox support scalable data parallel, Spark, Dask, processing and/or rendering? Are there any demonstrations at petabyte scale so far? I think this is probably a good question for you, Blake.
Yeah, absolutely. So at petabyte scale, the biggest difference, or there is no significant difference between the offerings that we have for customers and those that we use internally. And for example, we use our Mapbox tiling service, which is a large scalable solution that we use to create our global base map. And the constant amount of streaming data that goes into all of our map is done on a regular basis. And this is at the extremely large petabyte scale at that point in time. We do have the same similar offerings that we offer to customers to process their own data at scale for that. Although, frankly, at that point in time, there are very few offerings and things that compare in the data size to the global base map. But if you have one, we're very interested to know.
Okay, I'll hop in. We do have a bunch of questions coming in the chat. We were wondering if we would get a lot of questions, and the answer is yes. So we did actually have one that was specifically pointed out. Usually when working with large data sets, they are tied to buildings. With the new 3D models, will they be interactable with mouse events such as clicks, mouse overs, etc.? And anyone on the team who has an answer to this, feel free to chime in.
I think this might be a good question for Konstantin.
Sorry, I was reading the other questions. Can you please repeat that question?
Yep. Usually when working with large data sets, they are tied to buildings. With the new 3D models, will they be interactable with mouse events such as clicks, mouse overs, etc.?
Yeah. This is certainly something that we've thought about before. In the new standard style, what we focused on is building the base experience first, and so right now you can't actually click on all of these buildings, but this is definitely something that we've heard a lot from our customers and from our various beta testers. So I'm certain that there is something that we'll be able to tell you about this in the future.
Thanks, Constantine. And I'm going to stick with 3D models here. Can the base 3D massing models be overwritten on a piece-by-piece basis with custom massing shapes? Mel, is there someone from a 3D perspective that can answer this one?
Yeah, I can answer this for the standard style. So the style that you saw in a previous session. So it is not possible for the standard style. Like we kind of have these base map layers that we kind of own and control and kind of like make decisions around sort of best practices. That being said, you can certainly like add your own custom layers or have your own custom layers and potentially have, your own data associated with this. There is a experimental add models API as well. It's really experimental still, but we can also share sort of like some basics into like how you would do that with different 3D massing models.
Thanks, Mel. And I know in a prior session you did share a link for that. Could you drop the link in the chat just when you get a chance? Doesn't have to be immediately.
Yes, I will do that.
The 3D models, definitely a topic of conversation. So I'm sticking with that. And this maybe Mel and Constantine, you could tag team. Can you share info on the software suite and workflow your team uses to create the 3D building models? It's just a question out of curiosity.
I can answer this, though I'm not on the modeling team per se, but we do have a 3D modeling team that really spends a lot of time curating these 3D landmarks and also modeling them and really making these beautiful landmarks that you see on our map. So they have their own, custom workflows. So they use softwares like just commonly known 3D softwares like Blender, for example, that you may be familiar with. And that being said, like there's no sort of restriction into like what type of software you can use to create these models. It's really up to you. Kind of like commonly used softwares will work just fine to do that.
Thanks, Mel. I'm going to give you a break on this next one. And I will say that I see questions coming in the webinar chat, which is okay. We do have a lot in the Q&A, and I'm currently going through the questions in the Q&A function. So if you see in your menu at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's should be a button that says Q&A. If you could type there, it's probably more likely right now that I will see your question. But I will try and also address what's in the chat. Okay, so Patrick, you were called out by name on this one. So let's see. My experience is more with Android, but could you explain the difference in the user location and camera components? Specifically, it seems they use different systems to track the user's current location.
Sure, yes. So this answer is applicable for both iOS and Android. So the user location feature is used just to track the user's location at any point on the map, whereas the camera can be used just to change how you're perceiving the map. So imagine you're in kind of a canyon or looking at a mountain. You can shift the camera so you get a different viewpoint at a different angle of the map at any time. And that's independent of a user location being there or not. Whereas the user location is just kind of the indicator icon for that user. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Patrick. Transparent roads currently lead to dark overlaps Is there a solution to keep the transparency the same, even with overlaps, instead of adding the transparency values?
Maybe another one for Konstantin.
Yeah, so the question the way I interpret this question is if you have multiple roads that like are overlapping and you render the road transparent, like we just render that multiple times and it just becomes darker. And the answer to that question is that there's no way to do this currently in the Mapbox SDK for good reason. And the reason being that if you render this separately, we would use a large amount of GPU memory. We used to have this option very early in the Mapbox SDK and like, I don't know, 8-9 years ago or so, but we removed it at some point because it was an easy trap for users to fall into, where they could create styles very easily that would render very, very slowly. So unfortunately, this isn't something that's currently possible with the Mapbox SDK for performance reasons.
Thanks, Konstantin. Okay, next question. Does Mapbox have any resources or docs on using Mapbox GL in Vue.js? For example, any pre-built components for layers, widgets, etc.
I think we recently published a Vue tutorial. I need to double check, but we can follow up with an article. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, and if you are able to double check and you have any links, definitely pop it in the chat. Okay, I think this next one, Mel, back to you, maybe more around models, but can you add trees to Mapbox standard? If so, can you specify which species of tree to add? And how do we decide which tree species show where?
Yeah, sure. So this question is interestingly coming out a lot. So I'm really curious to hear what your use cases are for adding custom trees. But so in Mapbox standard, we kind of predefine the trees. And what we're doing is we're using like a property coming from OSM that gives us like an indication what type of tree it is. So I think we have certain, I'm actually at the top of my head, not entirely sure, but I think we have pine trees. We have like different species like broadleaf trees and so on. So not actually by species, but by like, now I'm going to go into, not exactly sure how to phrase this, but we're definitely like differentiating trees. So you would be able to recognize a palm tree and differentiate it from a pine tree, for example. In terms of like adding your own trees, it is, as I mentioned before, technically possible with this experimental API. So I've shared the documents earlier that kind of outline exactly that issue. Actually, they're actually about trees, and there you could see how you would achieve something like that, like how you would add a custom model. But yeah, that being said, it's still experimental. Have a look at these documents, but we're also, we have this on the roadmap as something to pick up at a later point and make this easier for customers to add their own models, so to speak.
Thanks, Mel. Okay, I will pop over to the chat. And Konstantin, it does look like you may have addressed this. Let's see if we can address this, publicly via voice. So the question is, do you have any recommendations, ideas for this scenario? Our primary use case is offline maps, and our users download the maps they need ahead of time. When they are using our app, sometimes they may have an internet connection, but it is poor or unreliable. And the issue becomes that even though the maps are downloaded, sometimes it appears like it is still trying to download them. The question goes on a little bit longer, but could you just sort of reiterate what you had mentioned, Konstantin?
Yeah, this is a good question. And we've designed the system so that it uses the offline data first, regardless of whether there's connectivity. So even if there's very poor connectivity, it should use all of the data that's available offline on the device first to render something. And then it'll try to refresh the data on a best effort basis. If there's some internet connectivity, it'll refresh that eventually and then swap out the data for the new data, for example. If you're not observing this behavior, then there may be something else that's going on. For example, there's some kind of data in the style that's not cached offline properly, and it, for example, needs both data to render this correctly. if you're not seeing anything in any success, like looking into that either, then I think this is something that you should reach out to support for, because I think I would consider that a bug, because like I said, the behavior is that we should always show something regardless of connectivity if there's something cached offline.
Yeah, does anyone want to elaborate on that at all? That was a great answer, but just leaving it open for other panelists. Okay.
Just my 2 cents on that is, though I agree with what Konstantin said, if your intent is to really force a situation where you just want to use offline data, then there is an API called offline switch that you can set a variable there to false. I think the variable name is called is Mapbox stack connected. It's part of both Android and iOS SDK APIs. And if you set that to false, basically it forces all HTTP requests to respond as with an error. So which would basically cause the scenario that Konstantin explained, that it would only try to load the offline data first.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. All right, 2 questions for the imagery team, the raster team. Do you have a high-level overview of what the imagery team is working on if and when it comes to AI? And as a bonus question, whether you've experimented with generative imagery to augment areas of low quality, like missing data, image artifacts, etc. Also, Anthony did want to say in all caps, thank you for everything that you do.
Jacques, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, yes, and also thank you back. Let me find your question again real quick. So I think everyone on the team has poked around in Midjourney at some point to make something that is interesting and satellite imagery related. But beyond that, there's some like really early thoughts around things like Stable Diffusion and ControlNet to sort of fake data where we may not have the sort of data that you might hope to have. But this is really all just ideas at this point. Nothing with a really firm plan yet. Yeah, so that's that. And then I gotta find the other question. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? The first part? Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I have answered your question. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful, Anthony.
Alistair, do you want to color anything in there?
No, I mean, like Jacques said, there's been a lot of other experiments we've done in the past. We've done stuff around, getting like super resolution on imagery, using lower resolution imagery to create pixels at a higher resolution. There's a lot of work being done in the space around that. And it's interesting. One of the things that we need to balance is really getting sharpness, and the quality of the data is really important when it comes to the higher resolutions. And so getting it to a point where it can, really pass as something that it was, say, natively collected at 15 centimeters as opposed to being super resolved there. There's still some work to be done there, but we've seen some interesting results early, and it's something we'll continue to poke at.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to this one. Any plans to customize the shading styles? It would be nice to customize the shadow color / opacity, for example. Konstantin, I do see you answering that typing. Do you want to do that one out loud?
Yeah, the way these colors are calculated changed with the introduction of the new model layer. And in the upcoming Mapbox SDK v11 and the Web SDK v3, you'll be able to add a new lights property to your styles. And that lights property can take multiple different values, which are going to be documented. And you can essentially configure the light color. And the light color will influence how the shadow will appear. For example, how soft the shadow will appear, how long it is, and what color it will have. Basically, these lights will affect the whole lighting of the entire map scene and not just an individual layer color.
Excellent, thank you. Okay. I do just want to take a brief minute and say, if you have questions that might be much more related to like Mapbox's navigation solutions, there is a navigation Ask Me Anything session that is happening right now as well that you could hop into. It's not that we don't want to answer those questions here, and we probably have some team members that could, but I just want to, make sure we keep the scope and focus on maps so we do get those specific ones answered. Okay, next question. Several years ago, I tried to convert my app to Mapbox. The iOS conversion went fine, but this person did have a little trouble with Android. So they were never able to add custom annotations to the Android version. They need to add a custom marker to the map at specific latitude, longitude locations. If the user clicks on a marker, an info box is then presented with additional information. Does anyone have any insight as to how to do this on Android, or is there any documentation that we could provide?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So yeah, basically we have two main ways to add such clickable annotations and then react to those clicks. I'm going to share the links in the chat soon. And yeah, you can basically use either our regular annotations. They can be like point annotations, line annotations, whatever, or view annotations that will allow you to add some complex Android views with buttons, even animations, videos, anything basically that you can add as an Android layout. And yeah, that should be it, I guess. I'm going to share the links in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Dimitri. Okay, rolling through to the next question, sequential question in the Q&A. When creating models for GLJS v3, what tools would you recommend for authoring, developing, and what optimizations should be considered so they render on the map efficiently? Mel, do you have an answer to that one?
I'm sorry, just reading and creating models for so yeah, as mentioned earlier, this is still sort of like in its very early stage, but from what I know, our modelers are working with Blender, and we don't have an official guideline sort of yet on like what what an optimal model would look like, so to speak. But of course, like the more complex it gets, the more impact it will have. But I think this is something you should definitely stay tuned for, as we're kind of past GA. We really want to work more on giving our customers more ability to work with their custom models and provide guidelines around it.
Okay, thank you, Mel. And then we did want to know if you could also answer this next question. So why only 15 layers? Many of the maps created in other software have 50 to 70 layers.
Is this question for me?
I'm not sure. Just we were poking around to see.
I'm actually not sure what this means. Like, there's not a 50, or could you maybe clarify a little bit? Like, what do you mean? Or does anybody else know here where these 15 layers are coming from?
I can talk about it a little bit, at least from the raster side of things. I think it is a performance issue by and large. It's interesting when you think about like Mapbox.satellite as a tile set. It's actually composed of a few different layers, so that 15 layer cap is actually even less than that. So yeah, that's my understanding of that. Maybe not the best to speak of it, but
I think the general question is at times when you're importing different sources onto a map, you are able to pull in different tile sets and layers associated with that for rendering at times. Layers is a hard term for us at Mapbox. Layers, unfortunately, can mean lots of things. They're style layers, they're layers in tile sets, and there's layers all over the place. Layers as a term is very difficult. So I'm going with the assumption that you're talking about how can you add different geographic layers onto your map. There's not a 15 layer limit in the same way. A tile set on our platform is limited at I believe 20 layers overall on a single tile set. A single tile set can have then be added and stylized on that. So there is an underlying limit in the SDK about how many layers it can point to. I do not, it's more than 15, I know that. So I think that there might be just some help about what needs to be done. After 15 layers, my map won't accept, yes, from imported tile sets. So, but you can have multiple layers within a tile set.
Yeah, and the 15 limit refers to the 15 unique sources that are permitted in styles that are saved to Mapbox account. So it's a little bit different than layers. So if you run to the source limit, we do have some guidelines on how you can combine data before uploading it and using various different filters in the style editor to fix this issue. So this should be related to your sources. So you might want to check the sources for the style and see if you can combine them somehow.
Yeah, like also said, in general, these limits are in place to prevent you from creating a style that performs very poorly, for example, because it loads like 20 or 30 different tile sets. And the reason what you should do in that case is, like also pointed out, look at your channel architecture of your system and make sure that you combine sources ahead of uploading them so that we don't have to load 20 different tile sets or layers from 20 different tile sets in order to actually render the map.
All right, excellent. We turned that a little bit ambiguous question into a pretty solid answer. So thank you, team. We did kind of kick that one off with someone from the raster team. So let's keep it with the raster team. This one's for Alistair. Is there a way to limit cloud coverage / time frame on a specific tile that I have zoomed in, or is it only static data inside the satellite classic style?
Yeah, that's a great question. So depending on the source, clouds may be present. Those images are static, as in they're not living images. They're not regularly updated. I mean, we update them regularly, but they're not like updated daily. One of the challenges of collecting with a satellite is they're flying in space, and sometimes when they take an image, there's clouds present. They do work to vendors work to minimize cloud coverage as much as possible, but sometimes it's inevitable and they get in the images. But we work with our vendors to try to minimize them as much as possible. Now, I think this question was specific to Poland, and one of the cool things about that is we are in the process of adding a bunch of open source aerial data that covers the entire country of Poland. Aerial imagery, I won't say never has clouds, but I've never seen a cloud in an aerial image because they fly the planes below the cloud level. So when we make that update, you should get a nice improvement for Poland, where it should be, again, I can't promise because I haven't seen all the data, but it should be 100% cloud free. It's one of the nice things working with aerial data is that full elimination of clouds. But beyond that, we do try to limit the clouds, but without having another image to patch in, it's really hard to remove any cloud that's in the image because those images are static and you would be left with missing pixels.
Thank you, Alistair. And this next one, jumping around a little bit, but back to Patrick, who specifically answered the question about the camera API. So this was a follow-up, Patrick. I think you did type in the answer, but let's go live. Regarding user location and camera, how does the follow mode work? Is it implemented differently for each of these components?
And I added some resources in the written answer. So if anyone else is interested in this question, please do check out that piece of documentation I shared. But the brief response is follow mode allows you to combine the user location with camera updates. So you can kind of follow the user's location as it changes over time. So imagine a hiking scenario or navigating in a vehicle or any situation where that user's location is changing and you want the camera, that is like how the map is being viewed, to update based upon that. So I added some documentation for Android. If anyone's interested in documentation for any other platform, just ping in the chat and I can provide that as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, switching gears a little bit, moving more to the actually BI space. So we have a question. And I think I saw this question in a previous session too, so I wanted to make sure we got this answered. Do you have any recommendations on resources around creating maps within Power BI? I finally figured out how to create a choropleth with a custom tile set, 2010 census tracks, but getting there was a journey. I would like to continue using additional custom content, but I'm having difficulty finding documentation specific for the visuals in Power BI. Does anyone have, Matthew, wondering, and do you know of any resources for this?
Yeah, sure. We don't officially support the Power BI plugin anymore, but I know when we launched, we did release some examples and tutorials. We can take a look and follow up. But yeah, you should be able to, from what I understand, in Power BI, you plug in your style link. So you should be able to use the existing guidance to set your style up in Studio and then just plug that into Power BI. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Matthew, and appreciate that. Does anyone else have any insight on using Power BI? Okay. Yeah, if you do have any follow-ups on that, definitely we can try to get to them again in the chat or in the Q&A. Next question. Is there any plans for a deeper integration with third-party libraries like turf so that map.add layer could say something like type turf circle, and so that map add layer could specify a Mapbox standard filter spec, for example? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Is that a stumper?
This is definitely an interesting idea. Thanks for that, but there are no plans for that currently.
Yeah, there are currently no roadmap items for the specific case, but if you would like to expand on your specific use case and an application where you would use this, we would love to hear about it so we can also put it on our radar. But yeah, right now, nothing roadmap in this regard.
Thanks, Osa. Thanks, Konstantin. Can we generate our own custom map background skins? Can anyone address this?
I'm not entirely sure what background skins means, but you should be able to still create custom styles in Studio and deeply customize it as much as you need. If anyone else has anything more to add.
You could clarify, whoever asked this, you could clarify in the chat what you mean by skins.
So I wonder, would that be the background?
I'm
I
not
think there's also an awesome print feature in Studio that maybe depending on which usage you have, you could export them as like a print option as well, which is super helpful.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. But if whoever asked clarifies what they mean by skins, I'll check the chat and we can try to follow up on that. Next question. When we display our own data, is there a limit to the number of layers? If yes, will there be an impact on performance of rendering if the number of layers is higher than that limit?
Well, for the performance side of this question, there is no specific layer count where your performance will immediately drop. It's more about the content that is in a layer and how much data is rendered on that specific layer that will determine the performance impact. So let's say you have a layer with 1 billion items. that one layer will probably shoot your performance down significantly, whereas having a dozen layers with limited amount of data should still provide really good performance for your map application. So from performance point of view, there is no specific number of layers that will be negative to your performance.
Thanks, Osa. Okay, moving on. When drawing polygons, what is the recommended way to get all vectors within the polygon area regardless of zoom level? As simplification removes the elements at different zoom levels and causes issues with calculations. If there is no way, are there any plans to add polygon-based requests to the tile query API?
All right, I think I'm the right one to take this. I'm trying to read it out again.
Yeah, no problem. When drawing polygons, what is the recommended way to get all vectors within the polygon area, regardless of zoom level? And as simplification removes the elements at different zoom levels and causes issues with calculations.
So the tile query API, just to be sure, right now only works on the maximum zoom level. Within MTS, if you use that, there is controls over the simplification associated with the underlying data, which would change the number of vertices. By lowering that simplification through MTS, you are able to add more detail to that data at the maximum zoom level, and that would enable your tile query to get some different results. That said, vector tiles themselves and the underlying storage of those data is lossy, and so we will never have true precision. I hope that answers your question.
An addendum to this, if you add your data via GeoJSON on the client, there are options in the GeoJSON VT module that allow you to specify the simplification tolerance as well. But also in the case of GeoJSON on the client, the same caveat that Blake mentioned applies as well, in that like if your source data is super precise, there will be a limit at some point where like we have to simplify it to some extent in order for it to render in a performant way.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, is there a resource or example for how to rotate a map in the sense of moving the map when geolocate is active? And this is for online maps, not mobile maps.
Yeah, so all of the APIs for you to do that are available in Mapbox GLJS as well, meaning that you can rotate the map, you can control the camera, you can tilt the map view, but there's no plugin for GLJS that exists today that basically replicates what our navigation SDK does. So if you want to implement that in GLJS, then you have the APIs available, but you have to implement it yourself. However, for a navigation solution, I would recommend using the Mapbox Navigation SDK.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can we use SVG as raster background in tile format?
I'm not 100% certain that I understand the question, and if you had that question, could you please clarify that a little bit? In general, SVG is a vector-based image format, and you can upload SVG images in Mapbox Studio that you could then use as a background for polygons or for the channel map background. However, those SVGs are getting converted to raster images at some point. So like you upload the SVG, we convert that to raster, and then this is used for rendering.
Thanks, Constantine. Jacques or Alistair, I know we were saying, is there anything you want to add there?
No, not from my side. I think, yeah, it's a style question there.
Okay. Related to brush tools, would it be potentially possible to put light lamps around Mapbox, just like in Blender, for aesthetic purposes?
I can try to answer this question, though. I saw this before and I'm not sure if it'll answer it entirely, but I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to have like different light sources to sort of illuminate your map from different angles, kind of, yeah, like you would do in Blender, for example. So we don't have the ability right now to have multiple light sources. There's only one, actually there's two light sources. There's so-called directional light and ambient light, and you can sort of configure various things on these two light sources. But it's definitely something we also thought about, like what would it be like if you had more than one light source you could position, but it's not currently a part of standard or the 3D toolkit.
Thank you, Mel. Okay, these next two questions I think are for Blake, or Blake, you can handle. How often is data updated from OSM?
All right, so this gets interesting across the board. So our base map and our global system of data is not only OSM. So the features that you are seeing on the map could be from OSM related to directly. We are regularly and daily updating, or multiple times a day, updating the different layers associated with our map and processing and updating that. There's also a curation process that we have from any data that specifically comes from OSM in general around quality controls to make sure that data that should not get onto the map or is incorrect edits, for example, do not reflect on the base map as well for our products. So the short answer is a couple times a day is standard. There are moments where we do update the map even faster than that, depending on the circumstances involved. There's also some questions. I think I'm going to go ahead and pick these up around how often we update our 3D data and our buildings across the board. We, for most of our data, we are regularly evaluating for all of our customers where we can continue to add more data to the map itself. We can provide in the link and some, I think here in the chat, some of the places that you can directly provide feedback about the map to customers, as customers to us, and we will take that and do our best to make sure that we can update the data in a timely manner. So.
Thanks, Blake. And sticking with you, do you plan to add an accessible way to clear cache for a specific source ID? If a layer source is MVT and some of the features were edited then on a different zoom level, they'll appear in different geometries.
So,
MVT create on the fly from PostGIS.
As every software engineer knows, cache clears are one of the easiest things in software to do. So that said, there are features and functionalities we are thinking about solving this in the coming year to make some of these experiences better for users across the board. We do understand that at times when you do update your tile sets or sources, for example, these may not be reflected in the timely manner that you expect. I don't have any details right now, but it is something that we are looking to address to make this experience better for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Blake. Okay, this one's for Constantine. Is there any future work planned to allow for easier integration of custom layers to the map? By custom, I am referring to layers created using WebGL.
Yeah, so this is something that's already possible with the Mapbox GL.js SDK, with the Web SDK. The way you do this right now is to create this custom layer, and then you'll have to provide the GL.js shaders, or sorry, the WebGL shaders yourself, and like implement all of the remaining drawing code. And while there may be some things that we could do to simplify that, most of the work is still on you if you want to create a custom layer that's entirely custom drawn. So this is something that is possible, but there's only so much that we can do in order to simplify that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pull it back to Patrick. Patrick, similar to the questions that you have been answering, there's one more question The follow mode is only available for SDK Android and not to Mapbox GLJS Map Online. Do you have a response to that?
Yes, it's available on iOS and other mobile platforms, but not on online.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Zooming out to globe view, what options are currently available to customize it? Is it possible to insert videos, images behind or in front, overlaying the globe?
Yeah, so with globe view, you can add your custom data exactly the same way how you can add custom data and overlays to the rest of the map. It's the same map view. So the way you do this is you create, for example, a custom GeoJSON file or a custom tile set that contains the point or polygon data. And then, for example, in the studio or manually in your code editor, you are adding custom layers to the style that place certain items at that position. For example, you could place icons at that position, or you could even place images. In GLJS, there's also an experimental video layer, but that's only available on GLJS and not on the native platforms like Android and iOS. So long answer short, yeah, you can add your custom data also in the globe view because it's seamlessly zooming in and out from the regular map view.
Thank you, Konstantin. Okay. What is the best way to select water using query renderer features outside the tile?
Can you specify what you mean outside of the tile? Like out of the viewport, out of
Well, so
like JSON?
The query rendered feature basically does what it says. It queries features that are rendered. And if something's outside of the tile, it's not getting rendered. So there's nothing to query. There's a similarly named function called query source features that is able to query any kind of feature that's available in the actual tile source. And so if you use that function instead, you will be able to get results from the map renderer by looking at the source data. And that also contains information that's outside the viewport of the tile.
Thanks, Konstantin. Alistair and Jack, I think this is for you. Are there any plans for particle visualization like the old favorite wind visualization in GLJS?
Yes. So is the short answer. It's something that's currently being worked on. It's going to be, it won't be landing with the initial 3.0 release of GLJS, but we do expect it to land in one of the incremental updates shortly after. That's with what we're doing from the raster processing perspective, there's a lot of benefit. There's also benefit to vector data, of course, but there's a lot of benefit of having that in the renderer. So it is something that we're working on. We don't have a specific date yet, but we expect it to be available in the next couple of months.
Excellent. Thank you, Alistair. Okay, Mel, I think this one is for you, but we actually couldn't remember if you had already answered. But when using Mapbox Standard, would there be concerns with using it for dynamic 3D models, for example, with a vehicle driving along a road?
Yeah, great question. So actually, this is kind of where standard is coming from originally. So it was actually originally designed to be this immersive experience when you're navigating. So yes, absolutely. If you go on our product website, you should also see a link to our navigation product called Dash, and there you can definitely see applications of it being used in a context of like a driving vehicle and so forth. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So I'm glad we hadn't already answered that. Next one, this might be a similar question to the WebGL question, but this person is wondering if there's a way to add a custom layer type that is sourced from PDF. They use data sourced from Esri REST endpoints sometimes, and there is an option for that API to send back PDF data. Is that possible?
Yeah, so there are, I think, two ways to do this. The first one would be to implement the parsing of the data format yourself. And then what that means is you'd also have to do all of the rendering yourself as well. So basically using plain OpenGL or WebGL or Metal commands to draw pixels on the screen. However, likely what you'd want in that case is you load the source geometry from somewhere and then use the Mapbox rendering capabilities to render the geometric primitives like the lines or polygons. And for those use cases, there's for the native SDKs like iOS and Android, there's a custom geometry source available that you can use to provide custom geometry to a regular Mapbox layer, like a polygon or fill layer or a line layer, and then we'll use those layers.
Excellent, thank you. Next one, are there plans to create brushing tools with opacity, thickness, color, not only lines and polygons? This person wants to paint over the globe as if it were a canvas for educational purposes, explaining history and geography to students. Would this potentially be a studio question, Matthew?
Yeah, I can take this. We don't have any plans right now. We haven't really explored brushing tools, but yeah, thanks for the feedback and give us more. We'd love to hear more about the use case. And yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. I have a high resolution base map from where I extract buildings with height and added both layers to the map as WMTS layer and extruded polygon layer. The question is it possible to reflect part of covered by extruded polygon base map image to the top of the extruded feature? The idea is to replace building flat roof texture so it will have a more realistic roof. Very frequently, they need to toggle between, they need to toggle building layers to see the base map. Did the team get that? I had a little trouble reading that one. Any insights on that question? Okay, I'm sorry. Marina did post that question to the chat. So if it seems like we couldn't answer that one, but whoever did ask that question, if you wanted to elaborate a little more, that may help clarify things. We've got 5 more minutes. We have a couple more questions. So if you do have any last questions, definitely get them into the Q&A. And we have one right now. Constantine, is layer blending coming in the future?
This is a request that we're getting occasionally, and something that isn't something that's currently on our roadmap. The reason being that layer blending is using a lot of GPU memory because we'll first need to draw everything to a separate texture before blending it. This is theoretically possible, and it's fine to do this for 1 or 2 layers, but it's something that is very easy to misuse and create a style that is very poorly performing. But again, this isn't something that's on our roadmap.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to right here. Question related to updating tile sets. is using MTS the best option for updating tile sets? This person has found that they have a method using Tippecanoe and MB tile, which results in a full restyle of each updated tile set. Would the MTS API eliminate the need to restyle each update? And what are the other advantages of using MTS?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take this answer. So the short answer is, as of right now, there's not a way that fundamentally there would not be a recreated tile set using MTS that we provide to customers. That said, there is a lot of value in MTS, and its processing performance profile helps with that problem significantly. MTS is designed to scale automatically based on the size of the data and the processing required to complete the job. And as a result, we can handle extremely large data sets very quickly overall, or in some cases, complete it in a matter of seconds, depending on the data sizes. So from that sort of situation, there would be no need to re-upload the tile set. Internally, we would have recreated it for you. The bigger problem that I think overall that most customers have would be that the cache clearing that we talked about just a bit ago in those cases, and we are working on providing a better solution for that. For now, the best way is it's especially easy and customers do around MTS is to create tile sets of different names at that certain time, and then maintain and delete those tile sets as needed to provide different updated tile sets in a quick manner if that is a clear need. Other differentiated features around MTS compared to Tippecanoe in the pipeline that you're specifically calling out overall is that MTS provides a lot more flexibility in the ability for you to completely control, similar to how our style spec does, and the ability for you to change what is on the map and what is included in your tiles in a consistent way. The power of recipes is really similar to the way that our style spec is, in that it is manipulation of the data on the steps towards styling. If you really wanted to think about the process of creating a tile set and the creating the style itself, these are all steps towards the visualization. And with MTS, you have a much larger set of tools and deeper levels of control over that specific style and customization that you would like to make on the map.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake. Okay, so we have one more minute. There are some questions we didn't get to, which I apologize, but I do want to get to this last one. Mel, the question is, I have data of the same type and style. The data spans various zoom ranges. Is it best, most performant, to have a different tile set and a different layer to represent each different zoom range, or to use Mapbox expressions based on property data?
Yeah, I would love for others to chime in, but I think expressions are a great use case for this kind of scenario. And this is exactly how we're doing it internally as cartographers as well. We're using expressions, using the same tile set to kind of like define at each zoom level what things we want to show. For example, we use like a type property to say, at this zoom level, show us this type, at that zoom level, show us that type of features and so on. So yes, definitely expressions we're partially designed with this in mind and would be a great use case for doing that kind of stuff. And if anybody wants to add, feel free to go for it.
Yeah, in general, if you have data for different zoom levels, they should all be of the same, all be part of the same tile set. A tile set can span multiple zoom levels. You can define a minimum and a maximum zoom levels, and Mapbox will load all of the zoom levels in between as you zoom in and out. But if you use separate sources, that means that it will be a lot more cumbersome for you to create the style, and we will not be able to overzoom correctly. For example, if there's data missing or still being loaded while, for example, if the internet is slow, then you'll generally have a worse experience compared to if all of the data is part of the same tile set.
Okay, any last thoughts on that? All right. And with that, we are going to wrap up the Maps Ask Me Anything session. I think I speak on behalf of all of our panelists and the team here that was an impressive amount of questions. We do go in thinking that there certainly are plenty of questions, but we don't know if we could fill a full hour. And I think we could have filled 2 hours. So I apologize if we didn't get to all of the questions in the Q&A, and I don't think we got to most of the questions in the chat. But thank you so much for asking your questions. And we really appreciate you attending the entire build session. And we hope that this was useful and you leave with some inspiration and some ideas for how to build your maps moving forward. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.